right, so before we get into our study today, let's say the blessing, and we'll get into it. Blessed are you, Lord our God, King of the universe, who has chosen us from among the peoples and given us the apostolic writings. Blessed are you, Lord, giver of these writings. Amen. All right, book of James. And so, again, we're just going to not go verse by verse. We're just kind of, on this book, basically, we're just kind of do an overview of maybe each of the chapters and discuss a few things, but then spend some time, and particularly in chapter 2. Who wrote this letter?
Just talking about that. The Bible says that the title of this book is James, and that it is not in fact James, and that we changed it. Yeah.
Yes, that is true. The name actually is Yaakov. It was changed to James for a number of different reasons. One, I think primarily, it may have been changed before, but I think it really was around the time of the King James Version that it was changed. So, in any case, yes, so this is, if I say Yaakov, or James, or Jacob, or whatever the case is, same person. But yes, so, but again, we know that there were more than one James. Okay? There were 12 disciples. Jesus called to help him, Simon, Peter, Andrew, James, his brother John, Philip, Thomas, Matthew, James, the son of Alphaeus, Thaddeus, Simon, Judas, and Bartholomew. Okay? There are 2 James there. And there was another James. There was James, the half-brother of Yeshua. So we have 3 Jameses. Which James wrote it? Okay. So, yeah, it's kind of interesting. It doesn't say. We think it is the half-brother of Yeshua, as far as that goes. But it doesn't specifically identify him in any necessarily particular way. It's kind of interesting. Was his half-brother, did his half-brother really believe he was the Messiah while he was here on earth?
It doesn't look like it. Doesn't sound like it. Think so.
He what?
It doesn't sound like he did.
No. Yeah, he wasn't a believer while Yeshua was on earth. He became a believer at the resurrection. Okay? And when he saw him again.
They had to have been really trained because he stepped into a very high leadership
Yes.
position and was highly
Yes.
respected.
He had to be somebody who really knew the Torah, the Tanakh, because again, yes, he did step into a very prominent position within that congregation, within that synagogue. Okay? And so he may have been prominent in that synagogue before that. Okay? As far as that goes. So, yeah, so that's kind of interesting how this plays out. So let me ask you this. Anybody do any research into when this book was written? Okay, because again, understanding the book, you really kind of need to understand, who wrote it is important, but number 2, when was it written, and what time frame was it written? Because sometimes that will open up some understanding to what what he's referring to, why some things are mentioned and maybe some other things are not mentioned, and things of that nature. So, in any case.
Heard it was around 48 AD.
Okay, so again, James was one of the chief leaders in the church at Jerusalem. And so James wrote from that city, and it's thought that he wrote this book before the Jerusalem Council. Okay? In Acts chapter 15. Acts chapter 15 we've already studied right before we went into our study of Galatians. Okay, so we kind of know what Acts 15 is all about in the Jerusalem Council. But why do you think people think that it was written before the Jerusalem Council?
He talks a lot about the doing of the word, and it almost sounds like he's addressing the conflict that they addressed at the council, which would not have been necessary if it was after. He talks a lot about the breaking of the laws and the doers of the word and that kind of stuff. That would have been relatively unnecessary if it was after
Okay?
Acts 16.
Yep.
Maybe something to do with when he died.
Okay? Who's he writing to? Look at your Bible.
Jews who are dispersed in the diaspora.
Right. He's writing specifically to Jews who are dispersed in the diaspora. Okay? That would have been the dispersion of the Jews during the the time of captivity. The Assyrian, when Assyria came and dispersed the 10 tribes, when Babylon came in and they made a further disbursement and things of that nature. So these would have been Jews that he's writing to outside of Jerusalem. Okay? Let me ask you a question. Does he ever mention anything about Gentiles in this book? No. Okay? He's writing specifically to Jews that have been dispersed, and there's no mention of Gentiles. Two big reasons, good reasons too, of why this is probably written before the Jerusalem Council. Okay? Because the Jerusalem Council, they're talking about Gentiles and how do we include them into the congregation, the synagogue. Okay? So it is supposed that this book was written sometime between 45 and 48 CE, okay? And Jerusalem Council being held sometime between 48 and 50 CE, okay? And so, so why do you think this book is so important? 6 chapters, talking to Jews who've been dispersed. 5 chapters, sorry, you're right. Yeah. And yet added into our canon. Any thoughts? Yes?
Maybe just to have all the Jews on the same page, you try to influence the Gentiles to go toward that way. Or
Okay.
that way.
Okay, good. All right. So, yeah, again, they're in the world. They've been dispersed from Jerusalem, the city of, where they've been, used to hearing the word and, and things of that nature. And so, it's like a Jewish person coming to the United States being bombarded with what we're bombarded with all the time. Okay? And it's like, yeah, just like we do, we need to make sure, they would need to really make sure, that, what they're doing, they're not being influenced by the world and things of that nature. And so, does this book remind you of any other book in the Bible? Specifically, the Tanakh? Yeah.
Yeah, it always reminded me of Deuteronomy and
Okay.
its practicality, living out, how to live out the laws that were given.
Okay? Remind of Deuteronomy, living out the laws. Okay? Any other book that it might remind you of? I was thinking, more like the wisdom literature, like Proverbs or something like that, because again, it's telling you, it's giving you wisdom and why you should doing this as well, not only just to do it, but why we should do it. and that nature. So I guess it was just kind of, it could be Deuteronomy, great answer, Proverbs, wisdom literature, whatever the case is. But here again, he's, there's a consistent focus on practical action in the life of faith, okay, in a believer's life, I think that nature. So, just kind of reading through this, what do you think maybe the big idea of the book is? Yeah.
Faith that works. Faith that works,
Okay.
works.
Yeah, it's a faith that works. It's a faith that produces, I guess I'm going to call it authentic works. Okay? And that's what we're going to be taking a look at here primarily. But again, it's just amazing what's going on in this book. And so, what we're going to do is we're just going to kind of take it chapter by chapter. Okay, I'm going to save chapter 2 for last. But I'm going to go 1, 3, 4, and 5, and then if you've got questions or comments about that, we can take a look at that. But again, just understand, we're going to keep this more of a summary type situation instead of really digging deeply into it. If you've got, if you've been through it and studied through it, I know Lydia has, and things of that nature. I think you did that in high school, didn't you? Yeah, things of that nature. And I can understand why she wants to go through this, because there's a lot of good stuff in it. Okay, but, and I know it's going to kill her just to say, oh, we get anyway, but it's kind of the point here is we're just going to spend some time here summarizing things and taking a look specifically at a certain passage. So, okay, so let's take chapter 1. Anything in chapter 1 just kind of get pulled out, and what's chapter 1 about here?
In verse 4, but let patience have her perfect work, that ye may be perfect and entire, wanting nothing. Once you have patience, but yet you don't want anything.
So, okay, and so patience is a great characteristic to bring into your life and to work in your life, and there's a way how to do that. So, yes.
The kind of the patience and the steadfastness, it's about a kind of a metered steadiness, a faithfulness, that's the word, faithfulness, persevering, continuing to do that which is correct, and it's kind of an intro to chapter 2 at the end of chapter 1, but it's, the bridling your tongue, not being, rampant crazy, doing all kinds of worldly stuff, it's about a focused faithfulness on doing what is commanded and doing what is correct.
Okay, good. Yes, sir.
I really enjoy verse 12, where the person who endures temptation, it's not that you're not going to go through temptation, it's that you endure temptation, and he says that you're going to receive this crown that the Lord's going to give you, the crown of life, to those who love him. So loving the Lord through the experience will help you overcome that temptation.
Okay, yeah, good. Good. Yes, sir.
And I thought it was right in verse 1, the joy that you're supposed to have with those trials, because he loves you enough to test you and to make sure that you're on his path to come home to him instead of walking everywhere else. That's the reason that they're there to start with.
Okay, good, good.
I think we just read something last week or so, how the Lord in Deuteronomy was talking about how he would test his people to know what was in their heart.
Right.
And here this kind of applies, I think.
Yep, exactly right. Good. Okay.
The joy part, I think that's the thing, it's the joy of giving, the same as this is with your tithe. I mean, it's a joyful heart that gives, it's not something that's, oh, man, I gotta give this, I gotta go through this, you know. Yeah, I get you.
Yeah. Yep, good. And one of the things that's coming out here, and which is really what I want all of us to understand, what we're going to understand about the book of James by the time we get done here, is that faith is not an abstract idea. In other words, what does that mean? Faith, how do you, somebody says, I have faith in God. Okay? I mean, we would all say that, right? We have faith in God. But that's just an abstract idea because how do you express that? In other words, what does that look like? Your faith in God, what does that look like? Without doing anything, what does that look like? It's, you don't know. But yeah, it doesn't look like anything. It's just an abstract idea. And this is the point. He's saying, real faith, true faith, is not just an abstract idea. True faith has got to have something behind it. Works. Okay, and this is one of the things he's talking about here. Okay, and so, yeah, and that's starting to come out here in chapter 1. Okay, anything else in chapter 1? Okay?
I found in, actually, I was really all set to talk about chapter 2, but I did see in chapter 1, where verses 22 and 23, but be doers of the word, obey the message, and not merely listeners to it, betraying yourselves into deception by reasoning contrary to the truth. For if anyone only listens to the word without obeying it, and being a doer of it, he is like a man who looks carefully at his own natural face in a mirror. For though he thoughtfully observes himself, then goes off and promptly forgets what he looks like, what he was like. I think the book of James tries to reconcile faith and works. I think the Jewish people were over here with the works, and the Gentile believers were kind of heavily on the belief, and James is like, you can't have one without the other. So.
Okay? All right, good. Yes?
And those, I was also thinking, then, like, well, we can't just do chapter 2, because the 122, the doers of the word, what other word did they have than the Torah? Like,
Yeah.
they may have, some of them may have had more than that, but he's writing the dispersed peoples. They don't have anything. What they have is probably memorized, and maybe some partials, or maybe there was some families that had some Torah scrolls, possibly, but very unlikely that they had much of anything besides what they had memorized, and what they had memorized would have been Torah.
Yes.
Like, primarily.
Yep.
So that was the word they were doing. They didn't have anything else.
Right, exactly. Exactly. So it's like, yeah, right, exactly. So, yeah, and the only place, no home would have had a Torah scroll. The Torah scrolls were treasures that were kept in the synagogue. And if they were lucky to have a synagogue in their town, then, that's one thing. But otherwise, it was all memorized, and things of that nature. So, yeah, good. All right, anything else on chapter 1? All right, chapter 3.
Ooh, bite it.
Do what?
Bite it.
Sorry, I didn't hear you.
Bite it.
Bite it.
Bite it. B-I-T-E.
Bite it.
Bite your tongue.
As the tongue.
Oh,
That's the theme.
Taming your tongue.
That's the
Taming
theme.
the tongue.
okay.
He was a different way of like.
That's the summary. Bite it.
Gotcha. Okay.
When a problem comes along, you must bite it.
Okay.
Bite it good.
We'll get there.
All right, now to get on the serious subject here.
Yeah.
That verse that she's talking about, we have a practical application of things that are happening around our world where we see the fire that consumes everything so fast. And the word here describes the tongue as being able to do that. And it's so destructive can be.
So, yep, good, yeah, good. Good thoughts, good. We're to bite our tongue or to watch what we're saying, because yes, you can destroy somebody or something or a relationship faster than those wildfires in Maui. So, yes.
I guess it goes with the Torah portion and the getting rid of the people that are gonna try to influence you a different way.
Okay? Yep, good. Okay, anything, yes?
I like the contrast, the sort of revealing contrast when you get verses 13 through, what is it, 16, the end of it, 18. Because he talks about all of the negative impacts of the tongue and, you know, your impact your word can have. And it's kind of like, oh boy, well, I'm never going to speak again. By the time you read, you take it seriously. By the time you get to the end of that section, you're like, well, what do I even got a tongue for? I'm ready to give up here. But there's hope. The contrasting concepts in the rest of the chapter, the why, talking about wisdom and saying that like this bitter jealousy, selfish ambition is the opposite of wisdom. Well, where did that come from? Well, all that tongue stuff, all of that negative impact of your tongue, that's what comes from the jealousy and the selfish ambition. And then he says in verse 18 that harvest of righteousness is sown in peace by those who make peace. Oh, okay. So we can use our tongues. It just has to be to make peace, And it gives you the opposite of what you're supposed to use it for.
Yep, yep.
Rather than just not speak at all.
So, yeah, good. So, yeah, it's not that we're not supposed to use our tongues. We're supposed to use it with godly wisdom. And so, yeah, good. Any other thoughts? Yes, sir.
Chapter 3, I'm sorry, I'm jumping ahead. I'm already in chapter 4, I'll wait.
Okay. All right. Anyone else in chapter 3? Okay. You're doing well. Yes.
It reminds me of that old saying that the content of this, talking about the danger of your tongue if you don't control it is they say that that's why you have 2 ears and 1 mouth.
Yeah.
So that you can listen twice as much as you talk.
Yep. Yep. And that's not a bad thing either. So, good. Yes.
7 and 8 talks about every beast and birds and serpents and things of the sea is tamed by mankind. But verse 8, but the tongue can no man tame. It's an unruly evil, full of deadly poison. It's amazing. There's out of your whole body that one part. I mean, it's physically. I mean, you can look and put it into the small perspective, but just amazing what the tongue can do.
Yeah. Yeah, you put it on the back end of a ship, it could steer be the rudder, right? Just steer the ship with that little tiny tongue, yeah. So, yes, sir.
One other thing, in chapter 3, verse 1, we have leaders that are teachers, and we're supposed to honor that position as well, according to the scriptures. But the fact that he says here not to let many of you become teachers, knowing that you shall receive a stricter judgment. There is more of a judgment on those for every word that they teach and what they teach, and so it's one of those things that if we're seeking that in the future as an opportunity to become a teacher or something, that would be something to consider as well. Know everything about the requirements, right?
So, yeah, exactly. And what's encouraging to me is that next verse. If anyone does not stumble in word Yes, a perfect man. So I've stumbled quite a bit, so I continue to. So you all know, I'm not perfect, so anyway, but, all right. Yeah, any other thoughts on chapter 3? Okay, let's go to chapter 4. And what's going on here? Yes, sir.
One thing jumped out in chapter 4 to me is the fact that if we become friends with the world, here we have all these other things he's been saying up to this point, even with the tongue, but now it's dealing with application of becoming a friend to the world or engaging in sinful lifestyles and stuff. But if you become a friend of the world, he says, you become an enemy of God. And so the warning here to the Jewish believers is, don't get entangled into the world and become like them. You know, it goes back to Torah teaching, right? And that's where it's at right here.
Yeah.
And so that you don't become an enemy of God, because his judgments were, hey, blessings on this side, curses on this side, you know, follow me or else, you know. And so
Yep.
I see that laid out here as well.
Okay, good. Yes, sir. Yes, ma'am. Sorry.
Well, when he talks about desire, it's really just the desire to have our way, no matter what. And then something else, if pleasure, like is people's policy of life, a lot of people, that is what they want, it becomes an addiction. They're absolutely addicted to finding happiness or finding contentment or finding the right person or finding enough money or whatever. I mean, and then they're going to choose to go about it their own way.
Okay. Good. All right. Yes, sir.
In the follow-up, right after that verse, it says that, or do you think the scripture says, in vain the spirit who dwells in us yearns jealousy? In Torah, it teaches us that God is a jealous God. And now he's put his spirit in us, and he's a jealous spirit when it comes to sharing us with anything else in life.
Right. Okay. So, yeah, good. Good, yes.
He gives several teachings, and I have to go back to the Greek to totally verify all of this, but four times he's saying after a teaching, therefore, and he makes application. And then again, verse 6, therefore, verse 7, therefore. And he ends the whole chapter with therefore, and he summarizes basically the whole thing. Whoever knows the right thing to do and does not do it, for him it is sin. There's a lot of therefores. We need to find out why they're therefore.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's good. Yep, very good. So, yes, ma'am.
Yeah, this chapter kind of, for me, whenever I read a lot of this chapter, it's a perspective chapter. It's a perspective changer. And a lot of the ones that start with questions are that way. That's how you change somebody's perspective. You ask them questions.
Yeah.
He gets you thinking, and you know, what's causing all these problems? I wonder. Well, he gives you a perspective on, you know, how to deal with each other, how to deal with the temptations of the devil, but especially that last bit that we're, I think, probably extra familiar with. You know, you say, well, today or tomorrow we're going to go do this and there and buy and sell and do whatever. And again, you don't realize it till you get to the end. That's really summarizing what the rest of this chapter is talking about, all these problems that we create for ourselves. Well, how does that come about? Well, it's because our perspective is on all here, on what I'm going to do and what I feel like we were saying, you know, we're so focused on our selfishness and what pleasures and stuff. You're focused on what you're going to do, and that doesn't get you very far. What you really ought to be thinking, verse 15, is that if the Lord wills, I will do whatever. I'm going to do what is God's will. I'm going to find out what is God's will for my life. And then, like you said, it kind of brings it all down to the rubber and the road. Whoever knows what to do, that is right and doesn't do it, there's your sin. You want to know what the problem is? Because you know what you're supposed to be doing and you're not doing it. It's that simple.
Wow, yep, good. So, exactly. Yes, sir.
In verse number 8, draw near to God and he will draw near to you. We see here that your hands are involved and your heart's involved in the impurities that cause separation and a double-mindedness. If he's warning them so that they don't become entangled in idolatry and worldliness, and he says, you can't have it both ways. You can't choose God and put him on the shelf and say, well, I'm going to dabble in the world a little bit and mix this a little bit. He says, because we know that the scripture says in other areas that a double-minded man is unstable in all his ways. So we don't want to see instability in the Jewish believer. That's what he's probably pushing here. I don't want to see instability in this. I want you to be strong in the Lord, but totally be dedicated to him. Don't get entangled in the world. And since they were dispersed, they probably needed some instructions because they weren't going to synagogue,
Right,
or
yeah.
able to go.
Yeah, good. All right, anyone else? You guys are doing great. I got notes here for summary, but no sense in me going through them because you've already mentioned them. That's great. That's wonderful. Okay, how about chapter 5? Okay, anyone for chapter 5? Yes.
He, in chapter 11, or verse 11, and he kind of brings it back around to chapter 1, showing the endurance, that patience, that endurance. It's, we're considered blessed, those who showed endurance. And that kind of talks about Job and Adonai, who's full of compassion and mercy. But he's kind of bringing it back around to chapter 1. And then at the end of the chapter, he's giving hope because it does seem impossible to do all this, but if anyone strays and someone brings it back, you've saved a soul from death and cover a multitude of sins.
Okay, good. All right. Yes.
I think some of this chapter is particularly the last part of it, but I suppose it could cover all of it. This is kind of some of it feels like he's calling them out a little bit, but especially the ending part after verse 13, he's kind of giving them I don't know, I feel like it would have solved some of their confusion being dispersed as they were and probably not having very many synagogues, if any, access to the elders and priests like they're used to having. And he's telling them some of their major difficulties here, how to deal with them as a group, as a you know which one of your neighbors are Jews, and you know who's around you that believes like you do. You can still do things together as a group. You don't have to go to synagogue to deal with your problems. You, somebody who's sick, get together and pray for them. You know, you do something that you need, ask. And he kind of gives them a little, I don't know what the word is there, a respite, maybe, like, because they're probably like, what are we supposed to do? We can't go to synagogue. Where's the synagogue? How are we going to meet together?
Right.
Like, what? And he kind of rescues them a little bit here, and then they're probably some of their panic and their distraughtness. Yeah. But he also seems like at the beginning of this chapter, I feel like he's calling them out a little bit too. Because they're away from synagogue, they're probably a little off. Their focus is...
There's a reason why he's writing. That's no question about that. Yeah, exactly. All right, good. Yes?
Well, I'm not so sure they didn't have synagogue things going on. They are all believers, because he's calling them brothers.
Right.
They are believers in Yeshua. But then in verse 14, is anyone sick? Let him call for the elders of Messiah's community, which I would assume would be the ecclesia. He's talking about that word. So, I mean, they would have some access to some.
Okay,
Maybe more than we realize. But
okay,
they would be meeting together anyway.
right. Okay, good. Yes, sir.
One more. Verse 19 and 20, if somebody wanders from the truth and someone turns him back, let them know that he who turns the sinner from the error of his way can save a soul from death and cover a multitude of sins. It's an encouraging thing to know that, when somebody wanders, it's not just Yeshua involved through his spirit, but it's us involved in trying to help people turn back to him, And so not to just count it as somebody that's wandering on, I'm not going to worry about them right now. It's not my problem.
All right.
It ought to be we ought to be looking at it as that's part of my responsibility.
Yeah, good. Good, because again, they're dispersed and, there's a reason why they're dispersed, and it's easy to turn, your back and walk away. And you see something like that happen, you need to be able to restore them. So, good. Become active in their lives. Okay? Anyone else? Yes.
Throughout each of the chapters, he's been using examples, metaphors that they can understand in their culture. He's using agrarian, agricultural terms. He's using ships, tongues, things that everybody can associate with as these examples. So this just continues in this whole chapter, this whole book.
Right.
So the practicality of what he's using and how he's explaining things.
So you're getting a good dose of the Hebrew mindset, okay? There's a reason why, when you watch some of the videos from Israel and you see our tour guide, Rami, he can't talk without moving his hands, and they're very picturesque. And including, how they talk, how Yeshua spoke, and things like nature, they're always using illustrations, always using analogies. And we're gonna, we see that quite often. So, and part of really understanding what is being said here is trying to understand the analogy, putting the analogy together. And that's what we're going to do in chapter 2. Okay? So, any other thoughts on chapter 5? I know it's getting late, folks. I just want to finish this up real quick here and not spend another week on it. But okay, anything else? All right, let's go to chapter 2. All right, I am not going to steal anybody else's thunder, so y'all can speak up before I do. Your thoughts on chapter 2? Yes, ma'am.
I'll just do a short thought, because I have lots of thoughts about this chapter. but I just want to say that I absolutely I love this chapter. This chapter is mainly why I like the book of James, chapters 2 and 3. But I really appreciate how with the ensuing multiple analogies about not being partial, it's not just that you're not gonna nitpick out little things about people and separate them and know, well, this person should do this and this person should do something different because they have a different life experience or they're richer or they're whatever. Silly things that we humans do. I mean, it's just ridiculous. But it also means that when you encounter someone who has a different life experience or is perhaps maybe much richer than you are or has access to things you don't have access to, God doesn't see them any differently than he sees you. And that doesn't mean that they are brought lower. or that you are now more important because you're all the same. There is no level of importance. No one's brought up or down, or they weren't up or down to begin with. That's our
Right.
fabrication. We are people created by God that sees us as people he created, and period, end of story. And he holds us all to the same standard, that's all that matters. And so that's why I like chapter 2 so much anyway.
Okay, yeah, good. Excellent, very good, yes.
Well, at the very beginning of the chapter, it does talk about someone coming into your synagogue. So I think they did have synagogues there.
Oh, yeah,
But
sure they did.
once you get to verse, what is it? 14, over and over and over, you can just look. He's got faith, works, works, faith, faith, works, faith, over and over in that chapter. So he's talking about faith and working.
Okay.
Authentic faith works.
All right, good. Any other thoughts here? Yes, sir.
In that faith and works in verse 14, were you talking to me?
Go ahead. Go ahead.
I beat you to the mic.
Yes, you did. I was thinking.
Were you going to talk about 14?
I was thinking instead of letting my tongue start talking. Go ahead.
Was you talking about 14?
Yeah. Go ahead.
Well, you hit 14, I'll hit the other one.
Well, I guess
All
mine kind of just involves a general question directed toward him. Kind of sort of on his thought on something.
Okay, all right.
And my general answer will be, we'll get there in a minute. That's okay.
So-
No, go ahead, Chris.
Oh, well, it just seems to me that, or I guess my thought would be, is a lot of people, when you talk about faith and works and all it works, you can't work your way to heaven. The people that don't really quite understand or think the way that the direction we're going, do they have like a misconception or misunderstanding of what faith and works and how they work together, or what's the problem? Because they always talk about, when we talk about faith and works and faith that works, it's like they don't understand it, or their mind is twisted or been, they've learned so much a certain way and they just can't understand anything else, or you understand what I'm trying to say?
So basically, there's a mindset out there, and many, whether Christian preachers really understand it or not. But again, this all stems from the easy believism, pray this prayer and you're good to go type mentality. Okay? Yeah, we will preach. Okay, so we will preach from the pulpit, basically, yes, faith without works is dead and things of that nature. But we, again, when we give the invitation, it's like, okay, just pray this prayer and you're fine and you're ready to go. And that's the impression that we give people, and that's where they come off. And then they, during the course of, their spiritual life or Christian life, whatever the case is, they may start doing things. It's like the parable of the ground, and the seed. Okay, some of them, they pray the prayer, whatever the case is, the seed starts to grow, and dies off because it's thorny ground, and things of that nature. And so it's like, wait a minute, a true faith, a lasting, saving faith has got these characteristics. Okay, and you can't go through James, and I don't know how many Christian preachers actually preach through James, because I don't know how they can preach through James and not preach this, okay? I can't remember ever really preaching through James. I don't know what I preached on, I don't know everything to go back, but after going through it like I went through it this time, it's like, you're right, I don't know how they can not see it. But I really think it still goes back to that easy believism type of salvation where, they hear that, yes, Yeshua took all of our penalty on his shoulders. So wait a minute, if I sin, or it doesn't matter how I live, because he took all of that from me. So our analytical mind says, I can kind of live like the devil if I wanted to, because I prayed the prayer and I'm still good. Okay, I mean, that,
So,
I think for the most part, preachers are preaching it okay, right, as far as that goes. I think because of the way we approach it, a lot of times, even in the invitation and things like that, it can get misconstrued by a lot of people. And there's a lot of junk out there, too, that people listen to. So, anyway, I don't know if I answered your question or not, but there is definitely a disconnect between faith and the works that's supposed to go along with saving faith, because this is what he's talking about, saving faith. Okay?
A lot of people say, we don't have to work. What are you talking about?
Not for our salvation.
Yeah, well, that's what.
Yeah, right, and that's the point. Yeah, that's the rub, and that's the point, though. We are not working for our salvation, but our faith still should produce work. Saving faith will produce good works. Okay. Any other questions? Oh, yeah, sorry, Matt, go ahead.
That's all right, you covered that one really good. So we'll go on to verse number 23, where the scripture says, scripture was fulfilled when it says, Abraham believed God, and it was accounted unto him as righteousness. He was called the friend of God. So if we live out our faith by works, believing God for what he said, but also acting upon what he told us to do and things to do and to worship him and different things. Just as he offered up Isaac, it says this was the work, and he believed that God was going to provide. And so this act of faith with works demonstrated that he believed God for what he said he was going to do. And as he believed that and did that, it was accounted unto him as righteousness. And then he gets this subtitle of a friend of God.
Friend of God, yeah.
And that's pretty awesome.
Yeah. You don't have one without the other. Yeah, exactly. Good. Yes, ma'am.
To add to the discussion of where does the confusion happen, where does the loss of understanding happen with faith and works, I think I tend to be a little harsh on human nature, even realizing that I am a human and I'm being harsh on myself. But I tend to think that it's a lot less a misunderstanding, and it's just that we're lazy.
Could be. Yeah.
Because even if we're not willingly going, nah, I just don't want to do that, our brains, our fallen, depraved human minds are in a pattern of the easy way out constantly. We will always do the easiest thing possible. It's human nature. So when confronted with, well, your faith works itself out, and your faith will be evident by your works, nobody goes and asks the question, what works? What works exactly?
Yeah.
And so we just fill it in with the easiest thing possible. As long as you're nice to people and you're that's pretty much it.
Love God, love others.
Yeah, which is correct.
Yes.
But it's not complete,
That's right.
And so we kind of think, oh, well, the easiest way to put that is, well, as long as you're nice to people and, maybe you share the gospel, then that's about the extent of that. That's good enough. That makes the works. They don't actually answer the question and go, works, obedience to the law, which is the first half of the chapter.
Yes.
613 laws, whatever, that he's talking about, like, that's what you're supposed to be doing. Obviously, nobody does it all perfectly. But they just don't answer the question or even ask it. Because when I studied this book at Faith over in Pekin Baptist School, and we multiple times went over these different parts, and they've got it. They've got you're not saved by your works, but your saving faith works. And we were taught that, but nobody asked the question, what works? What does that look like?
Yeah. Yep.
Because we just fill in the easiest thing possible without even asking the question.
Yeah. Good. Yes, ma'am.
I was thinking about that just before Lydia started speaking, and she nailed it right there, that I grew up Baptist, but my grandparents, they were Pentecostal, and so it was back and forth, you know. They would get together and we'd be all talking, and they would say, well, you just believe you guys can live however you want and you won't lose your salvation, because they believed on the losing your salvation. And I knew my parents did not believe that, because we grew up Baptist, and I knew if my dad thought the word said to do it, we did it. And no, not perfect, I'm just saying that's how he lived his life. But we truly did not believe. He became a Christian when he was 22. We truly did not believe anything about the Old Testament. We truly thought it was not for us. And like she said, we never asked, what are you talking about works? Because we were like, yeah, you got to do works, but it's not going to save you. You do them because you are. And yeah, we never asked that. Never even thought of it.
Right, and yeah, so what we're going to get into a little bit today is something, I think, at least changed my thinking a little bit. Well, tell you what, let's get into it. Anyone else have to say anything before we actually get into it here? Okay, all right. Okay, so I'm just going to summarize some of this, just kind of looking at verses 1 through 7, okay? Faith should not display itself with an attitude of personal favoritism is the idea here, rich or poor, well-dressed or otherwise. Again, if you had got faith in Yeshua as the Messiah, then you shouldn't be playing favoritism with how a person is, how rich or poor they are, how well-dressed or otherwise they are, okay? In verses 8 through 13, it talks about the royal law, the law of the king, actually, literally. If you're keeping it, you're doing well. Okay? If you are showing partiality, or you're committing sin and you're convicted as guilty by what? By the law. Right? By the Torah. Okay? And so talks about keeping the whole law. If you stumble in one area or one place, you're guilty of breaking all of the law. Again, we got to keep thinking. They didn't have the New Testament then. Okay? What law are they talking about? It's Torah. Okay? So make sure you speak and act as one who is to be judged by the interesting law of liberty. He describes it here. Okay? And it's also described in the Psalms as, I will obey your Torah and walk in liberty and freedom. Okay? So it's just kind of interesting how it's being talked about here in these verses. And it calls it a merciful law. And he talks about, if you're not going to show any mercy to people, no mercy is going to be shown to you when you're judged. Okay? Mercy triumphs over judgment. Why? We're going to ask that Lydia question. Not what law, but why? Why does mercy triumph over judgment? What is mercy? Do what?
Forgiveness.
It's included. His mercy endures forever. His mercy endures forever. His mercy endures forever. What's another translation of mercy?
Love.
Loving kindness. Loving kindness, folks, trumps judgment. Are you going to sit in judgment over other people? Or are you going to show loving kindness? Love covers a multitude of sin. Now you're kind of understanding what that's talking about here. Okay? We're seeing an example of that here. Okay? So, now, I want to kind of act out verses 14 through 7, or 14, yeah, specifically through 17, but we may do a little bit more. Okay, take a look at verse 14. Somebody read verse 14 for me, please. I can hardly see it.
What does it profit, my brethren, if someone says he has faith but does not have works? Can faith save him?
Okay, so what does it profit, my brethren, if someone says he has faith but does not have works? Okay, so we all probably know somebody, at least who says we all have faith, right? Okay, I mean, we always say we have faith, right? But what if there's somebody among us or somebody we know that says, well, I've got faith, but or you've got faith and I've got works, you know, whatever the case is. You know, it's like, okay, can faith save? Can just an abstract idea, remember we were talking about how do you show what faith is without doing something? You can't. You can say you've got faith, but you can't prove it. Okay, it's just an abstract idea. Okay, and so can faith save him? If a brother or sister is naked, okay, gives an illustration. If a brother or sister is naked and destitute of daily food, and one of you says to them, depart in peace, be warmed and filled, but you do not give them the things which are needed for the body, what does it profit? Okay, so, for example, you have faith that God will provide for this person. But what good is that faith if you have means to meet the person's need, but all you say is, be warmed and filled? Okay? And so it's like, what good does it do? You've got the means to meet the need, but you don't. You've got faith in God that He will, but maybe He's trying to use you. And you're not being used. What good is that? Thus also, faith by itself, if it does not have works, is dead. Okay? So he's trying to make that, he's explaining that again. It's like, okay, faith. You've got faith. You say, yep, God will meet your need. Be warm and be filled. Without the work, without providing for that person, what good was that? So what? You have faith. So what? You believe God will meet that need. For that person that was asking you, what good is that? It's like you're dead to him. It's like he asked a dead person for help. And what can a dead person do? Absolutely nothing. Okay? And so again, this is he's trying to get us to understand that a faith that does not have any kind of works with it, it's a dead faith. It's worthless. It's definitely not a saving faith. But someone will say, you have faith and I have works. Show me your faith without your work, and I will show you my faith by my work. Okay? So again, it's the idea is like, okay, just like I was talking about before. You all say, you've got faith. So show me your faith without your work. You can't do anything, because then that would be work. Right? So what good does it do to say you have faith? if it's not producing anything? And here, listen. He said, you believe that there is one God. You do well. Okay, so yeah, I believe that there's one God. I believe Yeshua is one. Adonai is one. You do well. That's good. But let me tell you something. The devils, they also believe that. But at least they tremble at the thought of that. You're not even trembling. The idea here, I think, is what he's putting forth. Okay? They believe too. And they tremble at the thought that there is a God out there, living God. But do you know, oh foolish man, that faith without works is dead? What's he calling somebody who believes that they have faith, who says that they have faith, but they're not putting it to work? There's no works, again, nothing happens. They're not doing anything. They're not obeying Torah, because that's what it's talking about. That's a foolish man. That's a foolish man. Know anybody like that? And again, we get to the Abraham example. Was not Abraham, our father, justified by works? Wait a minute. Justification by works? Salvation by works? You want a verse? Here it is. But what's he talking about? He's talking about works that came from faith. Okay? Again, you got to watch the context here. It's not talking about a salvation by works. It's talking about a salvation by faith that works. Okay? Wasn't he justified? Wasn't he saved by works when he offered Isaac, his son, on the altar? Do you see that faith was working together with his works? And by works, faith was made perfect. If your version says perfect, anybody else's version say anything else? Yes, that's it. Faith was made complete. Okay, that's the idea there. His faith was made complete. And the scripture was fulfilled, which says, Abraham believed God, and it was counted to him for righteousness. Okay, it was a belief that worked, and it was the work that proved his faith, and it was the faith that worked that was with that faith with that work made it complete. And he was called the friend of God. How many people do you know, really, that say they believe, don't have any fruit, but can still claim to be the friend of God? Or God would say, he's my friend? Okay? Again, we need to be really careful on what we're accepting as saving faith, even amongst ourselves and our families and friends and everything else. And then he says, you see then that a man is justified by works and not by faith alone. Okay? So again, you have to include those two ideas together. It's faith alone compared to works and faith, a faith that works. Okay? You see that a man is justified, he's saved by works, a faith that works, and not by faith alone. Likewise, was not Rahab the harlot also justified by works when she was received by the messengers and sent them out another way? Okay, so again, it's a faith that worked. Okay, now this is the analogy I wanted us to get to, this last verse. For as the body without spirit is dead, So faith without works is dead also. Folks, just like your body without your spirit is dead. If your body loses that spirit, it's dead. Right? Faith is the body. If faith is the body, what is the spirit? It's works, folks. Faith, the body. Works is the spirit. The body without the spirit is dead. Okay? You have to have the two of them. One is the body, one is the spirit. Faith and works have got to go together. If you separate them, they're dead. You can't have works. You can have works without faith. Okay? It's dead. You have faith without works, it's dead. You need them both to have saving faith, folks. That's the whole point of what's going on here. And so, okay, that really is, again, it's a great book. It has a lot of great stuff on there, and things that we really need to understand as far as how to act as a congregation, how to act among people and others, and things of that nature. But the whole point, I think, the major point here is that faith without works is dead. Okay? If you're going to have saving faith, if there is such a thing, and there is, of saving faith, then it's a faith that has works. Because when you separate the two, they're both dead. Okay? Questions or comments? But yes.
Yeah, along that lines, we had all through the years, and you know, we've had these programs where we always tried to fit somebody with what their gift was. You know, that was the way we did things to explain this.
Yeah.
You know, and this is not what it was talking about. So a lot of the things that we used to say, well, you know, you need to find out what you're gifted at and work in that and this and that. Rahab was a harlot that hid people and lied about it to save their life. There's people that were in Germany during World War II that hid people. That's works, you know. Faith with works right there. And sent people another direction, you know. There's so many areas that this would, you know, it all comes down to believing Him, trusting Him, and living out the commandments, you know, living up to His standard and obedience to Him and loving Him.
Right.
That's the works. And it pours out into your everyday life because you're going to act upon those things that you know to be true. And by loving God and loving your neighbor, you know,
Right.
you're going to act upon those things. So that's the works.
Yeah. So, yes.
I was just thinking about with Rahab, which was like, here you pointed out two people, you know, and one was Rahab.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
And I think that sometimes we forget to listen to the voice of God. That, yes, it needs to be, that sometimes we're afraid of making the wrong move, or we're just don't really want to act in faith, or we're afraid of what other people might think of us, that we don't really listen to the voice of God, and when He says something, we do it.
Yeah.
And it's, you know, if this word was taken from us, if we were like those people and scattered, and we had only what was left in our mind, and we had to actually listen to God, then, you know, He wants to talk to us right now, and He's going to tell you when to say something to somebody. And
Yeah.
He did that through Rahab, and we would pretty much say that was someone we should avoid.
Yeah, we were ripping
would-
her off a long time ago. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. So, yes.
I just had a thought there.
Kind of at the end. I like to think of these controversial type things that people tend to argue about a lot. I like to think, well, if somebody comes up to me and has their argument, what am I going to say to them so that they understand what I mean by, faith and works? And I was just imagining somebody going, well, Ephesians 2:8 says,
Yeah,
by grace through faith you're saved, and it's not a work, so that you can't boast about it. And I was thinking through that, I was like, okay, first of all, it says, by grace through faith, you are saved. Put the period there for a second, even. And this says that faith without works is dead. So if you're saved by faith, that means faith has to come through works. Otherwise, it's not, you didn't get saved because the faith didn't exist.
right.
The only reason that verse says that it wasn't a work is the rest of the verse, so that nobody can boast about it, going around saying, I saved the human race, or I saved myself, whatever, I died on the cross. It's not talking about not works like, well, you don't get saved by working out like the Catholics and like a lot of people say you got to do works or you're not going to get to heaven. Well, no, that's not what that verse is referring to at all.
Right.
It's saying that the act of Christ dying on the cross was not a work that any one of us did. So we can't boast about it going around saying we saved the human race.
So,
It's simply the faith that will save you by the work that Christ did will have works with it.
right,
And if it didn't, the faith didn't exist in the first place. So you didn't get saved.
right, yep, yeah, good. Good. She's got a bigger mind than I do. It's like, wow, okay, anyway, I'm trying to follow her, and it's like, yeah, that's right. Okay, all right, good. All right, anyone else? So, all right, yep, go ahead.
One quick thing I just point out is she had mentioned about the contrast between Abraham, godly man, and then Rahab, harlot. Like it's kind of bringing that out. We talked about other things before, whether you're poor or rich.
Yeah,
This goes from one spectrum to the other, kind of because it covers everything in between. There's no respect of one or the other.
yeah, you're right. I didn't think about that connection, yeah. But if there's a greatest man out there, it's probably Abraham, because that was, and if there's the least of all the people, is probably Rahab. So, yeah, good connection there. So, giving an example of both.
But to God,
I'm sorry?
but to God, they're just people.
Right, yeah, exactly. Yep. Good. All right. Okay, well, let's close with our blessing, and then, we will wind up our service here. Blessed are you, Lord our God, King of the universe, who has given us these apostolic scriptures of truth, who has implanted within us eternal life. Blessed are you, Lord, giver of these writings. Amen.